The conference room of the Global Forum for Human Unity fell into a deathly silence as Anderson Cooper leaned into the microphone. His voice sliced through the air like a blade. "Mr. Roumie, you speak a lot about compassion and helping others. But beyond your viral videos and emotional speeches, what have you actually achieved?" The attack was swift, calculated, and clearly designed to humiliate Jonathan Roumie in front of a live international audience. But what followed stunned the entire room. Roumie didn't blink. He didn't avert his gaze. Instead, he offered a faint smile, the kind that unsettles an opponent more than words ever could. Because what Anderson didn't know was that Roumie had been waiting for this moment. He had the facts, he had the receipts, and he was about to respond with a quiet force that would leave the acclaimed journalist speechless and make Roumie trend across the globe within minutes. This was not just another ideological clash. It was about to become a defining confrontation, a collision of two worlds, the polished elitism of traditional media and the grounded authenticity of a man forged in faith and service. Anderson Cooper, seated confidently beneath the institutional logo of his network, believed he had cornered an easy target in the soft-spoken actor. He thought this was just another celebrity with a Bible and a fan base. He was wrong. The irony hung thick in the room. Anderson, the career spiritualist and champion of controlled narratives, was about to be challenged by a man who had spent the last decade walking through hospital wards, visiting forgotten shelters, and praying with strangers who had lost all hope. The contrast couldn't have been more striking. The polished anchor in tailored navy versus the humble man in a worn blazer and beat-up leather journal. The master of sound bites versus the voice of the voiceless. Up until that point, the forum had been routine. Reports on global empathy metrics, speeches on moral leadership, carefully rehearsed statements filled with diplomatic jargon. But tension had been simmering for weeks between Cooper and Roumie, especially after their public disagreements over spiritual freedom, media manipulation, and who gets to define truth. Just 2 weeks earlier, Roumie had criticized Cooper in an interview, calling out the selective compassion of mainstream narratives, championing certain causes while mocking those who speak openly about faith and forgiveness. Cooper's camp responded with a subtle but sharp editorial, but Roumie didn't retreat. He doubled down, with stories, names, and lives changed, not by institutions, but by people willing to get their hands dirty. Anderson's arrogance had been built over years of sitting behind bulletproof glass and carefully edited segments. He believed no actor, especially not a religious one, could hold their ground in a room full of academics, analysts, and global leaders. But across the stage sat Jonathan Roumie. He was everything that made the old media nervous. He didn't speak in talking points. He spoke from scars. He had never sought office, but his words moved people more than any press release. He never studied PR, but he understood the heart. And unlike many who talk about change, he lived it. Roumie had walked with the grieving, embraced the addicted, and stood in silence with the ashamed. He was not perfect, but he was present, and his presence made Anderson deeply uncomfortable. What made Roumie particularly dangerous to someone like Cooper was this rare combination: deep emotional resonance, lived truth, and unshakable composure. His critics called him dramatic, but those who had seen him pray with a suicidal veteran or quietly buy groceries for a single mother knew the truth. He doesn't perform for cameras. Cameras follow him because truth is rare. Across Latin America, people were demanding results, not rhetoric. This exchange between a revered journalist and a soft-spoken actor was being watched closely by political advisors throughout the region. Everyone knew that how each of them handled this moment could reshape alliances, narratives, and even the future of public discourse. And behind the scenes, both men were under scrutiny from their own circles. At Cooper's network, some executives had begun to quietly question his effectiveness. His outspoken critiques of certain religious communities were seen by some as selective moralism, and his frequent spats with leaders who carried deep popular support, like Roumie, were eroding his reputation as a neutral voice. Meanwhile, Roumie was quickly becoming a symbol of what was next: young, unpolished, deeply spiritual, and connected. Some mocked him, others feared him, but most silently admired him. Neither Cooper nor the packed auditorium knew what Roumie was about to unleash. The spark, it all began during what was supposed to be a technical session on international development funding. Anderson Cooper had been grilling presenters about fiscal accountability when, without warning, he turned sharply toward Jonathan Roumie, who sat quietly, pen in hand, scribbling notes. "Mr. Roumie," Cooper said, his tone razor-sharp and patronizing, We've all heard your touching stories about faith and kindness, but beyond emotional noise on social media, what have you actually done? The room froze. Such personal jabs were rare in these forums, and even more rare when delivered so directly on live broadcast. Several diplomats stopped mid-sentence. Others looked up in disbelief. Journalists started typing furiously. The cameras captured everything, and Cooper wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair like a man who believed he had just landed a crushing blow. You see, I've spent over a decade challenging real power structures, pushing real policies. But from you, we only see tweets, Instagram lives, and viral sermons. Where's the substance? The condescension was unmistakable. This was no longer a conversation. It was a public attempt to delegitimize a man's life's work. In the coded language of diplomacy, it was the equivalent of slapping someone across the face. Anderson's voice carried the disdain of someone who believed that years of polished performance in elite institutions gave him automatic superiority over those who spoke plainly and believed deeply. What Cooper didn't realize was that he had just stepped into a trap, one that many before him had also fallen into. He assumed that Roumie's presence on social media meant superficiality. He assumed the soft voice meant weakness. He assumed the prayer meant passivity. He didn't know that while he was speaking, Roumie was silently preparing. He wasn't flustered, he wasn't broken, but those who knew him closely noticed a subtle shift, a faint clench of the jaw, a slow setting down of his pen, a still, unwavering gaze. The room fell into total silence, the kind of silence that comes just before the moment everything changes. But Anderson wasn't done. Misreading Roumie's silence as surrender, he went for what he believed would be the final blow. An ambassador nearby tried to change the subject. Perhaps we should return to the agenda, he offered gently. No, Anderson interrupted, raising a finger. This matters. He turned fully toward Roumie again. Mr. Roumie, you come from a country with real issues, poverty, addiction, disillusionment. Your people deserve more than a man obsessed with going viral. They deserve governance, not performance. Now he had crossed a line. He hadn't just questioned Roumie's competence. He had implied on live broadcast that he didn't actually care about the people he served. It wasn't just a jab. It was a knife to the heart of his character. Even Cooper's own aides were now typing frantically on their phones. They knew he had gone too far. Meanwhile, social media erupted. Clips of the moment exploded across Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Hashtags like #RoumieVsCooper, #FaithUnderFire, and #SilenceBeforeStormed were trending in multiple countries. Political influencers and commentators were reacting in real time. Conservative accounts praised Cooper for challenging theatrics. But progressive and faith-based communities warned he just picked the wrong man to underestimate. And all of this, before Jonathan Roumie had said a single word. His silence had become its own kind of statement. And yet, Anderson Cooper mistook it for defeat. He leaned in once more. Look, Jonathan, I don't mean to offend, but if you want to be taken seriously in these circles, you might want to focus less on followers and more on results. Maybe you could learn something from those of us who've been doing this for years. The paternalism was now impossible to disguise. A global news anchor, publicly lecturing a humble advocate of compassion in front of the world. What Anderson didn't know was that he had just given Roumie exactly what he needed to deliver a response that would be remembered for decades. Because while Cooper was monologuing, Roumie was checking facts, not to defend his reputation, but to defend the unseen. The data he was gathering on his phone wasn't for show. It was the quiet work of a man who knew that truth doesn't shout, it simply waits. His team had prepared for this exact moment. They had anticipated an attack, disguised as a question, and had the documents, testimonies, and verified reports ready. This wasn't luck. This was preparation meeting opportunity in the most public and dramatic way possible. Once again, the moderator tried to restore order. If we could return to the scheduled agenda. Let him speak, someone whispered. But it was already too late. Jonathan Roumie leaned gently into the microphone. The entire room held its breath. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and absolutely devastating. Since you asked me what I've actually achieved, and he said to Anderson, let me tell you exactly what this so-called sentimental actor has been doing. While you've been polishing your institutional image for Manhattan studios, the air cracked. In diplomatic language, calling someone a decorative mouthpiece for the system is equivalent to a diplomatic nuclear strike. But Roumie wasn't done. He had chosen those words intentionally, because what he was really saying, out loud and on record, was what many had whispered for years. That Anderson Cooper's true value to the establishment wasn't his journalistic integrity, but his willingness to selectively defend or ignore injustice, depending on which side of power it came from. The accusation hovered in the air like thunder without sound. Every soul in that room knew this moment would change both men's legacies forever. Since you brought up results, let's talk substance, Roumie continued. In just the past 12 months, the organizations I work with have helped reunite over 600 families separated by detention policies, funded trauma recovery programs for abused youth, and opened shelters in 5 underserved cities without $1 of government support. That's more than you've accomplished in your first 3 years as a truth teller with the bold weight of the global media behind you. The smirk on Cooper's face began to fade. This wasn't what he expected from a man he thought could be easily mocked into silence. But let's be specific, Mr. Cooper, Roumie said as he calmly pulled out his phone, an act that, from anyone else, might seem informal. From him, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Just last month, I responded to over 10,000 individual messages from veterans, single mothers, teenagers contemplating suicide, offering real help through real connections. How many people did your newsroom help last month, sir? Do you even know? The question sat in the air like a silent challenge. Anderson opened his mouth to respond, but Roumie wasn't done. Since you brought up the problems in my country, poverty, addiction, lost youth, let me tell you what we've actually done. Instead of delivering elegant speeches about accountability while sipping wine backstage, then came a masterclass in moral demolition. We passed a law that reduced youth gang violence by 15% in the most dangerous districts. We opened over 20 new community schools. We launched mobile clinics in rural areas. We built the first trauma center for children orphaned by the opioid crisis. We renegotiated corporate donations to fund mental health programs. And we created a digital traceability system to monitor abuse reporting across shelters nationwide. With every word, Cooper shrank. He had accused Roumie of lacking seriousness. But here was Roumie dismantling his argument with surgical precision. Roumie's tone shifted. It wasn't louder, but it carried a new edge, the kind that makes a room straighten in their chairs. Do you know what actually bothers me about your little sermon, Mr. Cooper? You sit there and lecture me about social media as if talking to people, meeting them where they are, is some kind of crime. When I post a short video explaining how to apply for mental health aid, it's seen by 500,000 people, young people who would never read an official memo. When I hold a live Q&A on housing insecurity, 10 times more people join than when your network covers it at 2 a.m. behind a paywall. He paused, let that sink in. And when I go viral demanding transparency in rooms like this, it's not because I want attention. It's because I owe the true truth to the people I represent, not to a closed circle of elite commentators. Now the room was completely silent. They knew they were watching something historic, a speech that would be studied in political science and communication classrooms for years. But Roumie wasn't finished. His voice softened to a whisper, but somehow it hit even harder. Do you know what truly offends me, Mr. Cooper? That you dare question my commitment to my people when you've spent the last 5 years serving as a polished megaphone for a system that has systematically abandoned the most vulnerable in our region. Anderson tried to interject. Mr. Roumie, that's completely... I wasn't finished. That line alone struck like thunder. It echoed, it cut. Anderson Cooper's face flushed red. Visibly frustrated, grasping for words, he tried to reclaim control of the moment, but it was too late. Jonathan Roumie now had the full room, the full silence, the full attention. And now, Roumie continued, his voice rising slightly, not in anger, but with that sacred indignation that only rises from years of being underestimated. You question my credentials? Let me remind you, Mr. Cooper, before I ever stepped on a stage, I was running food pantries with no cameras around. Before people knew my name, I was sitting beside forgotten men in prison cells, reminding them they still had worth. I have spent my entire career fighting for those the system has tried to erase. I've defended the dignity of people who don't trend, while you were busy defending networks that silence their pain. The contrast was now devastating. While Cooper had climbed through media bureaucracy, mingling with elites and winning awards, Roumie had walked in alleyways, stood in soup kitchens, and held strangers while they wept. When you ask me what I've achieved, he said, locking eyes with Anderson, here's your answer. I never forgot where I came from. I never betrayed my community for political applause. And I've never been so desperate for the acceptance of those who don't respect me that I abandoned the people who do. The final blow landed like a thunderclap. You could feel the collective gasp. Jonathan Roumie had just accused Anderson Cooper, on camera, of betraying the people he claimed to inform to advance his own career. Anderson, trembling with both anger and embarrassment, finally spoke. "Mr. Roumie, that's completely inappropriate." Roumie leaned forward. "What's inappropriate, Mr. Cooper?" He replied firmly. "That a leader uses truth to expose performance? That someone questions your credentials when you have never bothered to learn what I actually do? What's inappropriate is this entire performance you just staged, posing as a moral authority while mocking those of us doing the real work." And with that, Roumie leaned back in his chair, his delivery complete, his presence unshaken. Anderson Cooper was silent. There was nothing left to say. The room remained frozen. Several long seconds passed before the moderator, pale-faced and nervous, finally spoke. "We will now take a brief recess, but the damage was already done, and the video was already viral. Political podcasts couldn't stop talking about the moment. Progressive outlets called it one of the most powerful truth-telling speeches in modern history. Faith-based media declared it a masterclass in conviction. Even some conservative analysts admitted Roumie buried him, and he didn't even raise his voice. Meanwhile, Cooper's team scrambled into damage control. A press release was issued, claiming regret that the dialogue became personal and acknowledging Roumie's passion for the people. But it was too little, too late. The next day, Cooper appeared on international news, attempting to frame the exchange as an example of emotional overreach and a lack of constructive dialogue. The interview was poorly received. Critics said he appeared defensive, ill-prepared, and evasive when questioned about his own record. Even some of his initial defenders began distancing themselves. A Republican strategist speaking anonymously to Politico summed it up. "You don't go after someone's credibility unless you've done your homework." And Cooper didn't. Roumie did. For Jonathan Roumie, the exchange was a turning point. His office received over 10,000 messages of support within 24 hours, from students, mothers, soldiers, even heads of state. Nancy Pelosi tweeted her support. "Jonathan Roumie represents the best of a new generation, grounded in principle, prepared in truth, unafraid to speak against power." Clips from the exchange helped raise over $500,000 in 2 days for aligned humanitarian efforts. He was invited to over 30 major gatherings within a week, from universities to policy roundtables, interfaith forums to international councils. His team had to hire additional staff just to manage the media requests. This wasn't just a personal triumph, it revealed something bigger. Main, a new generation of leaders is no longer afraid to push back, with clarity and compassion. 2. The old tactic of using prestige as a shield crumbles against authentic, prepared truth. 3. Social media is not a liability. For Roumie, it's a superpower for reaching the unseen. Dr. Melanie Price of Prairie View A&M University summarized it best. What we witnessed was the fall of performance politics and the rise of prophetic clarity. The Cooper-Roumie confrontation will be studied for decades, a watershed moment in political discourse, a story of how preparation beat positioning, humility beat arrogance, and truth beat spectacle. As one strategist put it, Jonathan Roumie didn't just win the exchange, he showed the world what the next generation of leadership really looks like. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the ripple effects were impossible to ignore. Anderson Cooper, standing among diplomatic circles, collapsed for the first time in years. He was removed from several high-profile panels, and behind closed doors, network executives began questioning his long-term credibility as a neutral moderator. Meanwhile, Jonathan Roumie was quietly promoted to several key advisory roles across interfaith alliance, humanitarian platforms, and emerging ethics councils. He became a regular guest on political programs, not as a celebrity, but as a voice of reason, moral clarity, and strategic insight under pressure. This moment didn't just end a conversation. It changed how political and cultural clashes were approached across the continent and beyond. Several veteran media strategists admitted privately, this clash between Roumie and Cooper revealed the danger of underestimating young, disruptive voices, especially those who've already proven themselves outside the traditional halls of power. What began as a televised humiliation attempt became a cultural landmark about respect, preparation, and the courage to face bullies. The moment spilled into non-political spaces. Clips of Roumie's calm, his unwavering gaze, in his iconic interruption. "I wasn't finished" became a meme, a slogan, a rallying cry. Educational institutions began using the exchange as a case study in communication and moral strategy. Law schools incorporated it into their public ethics courses. How one man dismantled institutional arrogance with calm facts and fierce integrity. Months later, political observers across the hemisphere agreed this wasn't just a media victory, it was a major step forward in the evolution of public leadership. Jonathan Roumie proved that preparation, authenticity, and strategic clarity can outweigh traditional advantages like seniority and institutional status. For Anderson Cooper, the moment was a harsh reminder that poorly planned attacks launched from pedestals of prestige can backfire spectacularly when the target has done the work. His attempt to belittle Roumie only succeeded in elevating him, and in the process it weakened his own position. But perhaps the most powerful outcome was what it revealed about the new direction of public life. The old rules, deference to hierarchy, formality over substance, are crumbling. People want leaders who speak directly, honestly, and with courage. Jonathan Roumie didn't just win that exchange, he showed us the future of moral leadership. Prepared, passionate, unafraid to stand and speak the truth. If this incredible confrontation moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. This is the kind of leadership the world needs to witness. Calm, clear, and courageously prepared. What did you think of Roumie's response? Tell us in the comments. And share this with someone who needs to learn how to stand up to institutional bullies. Turn on notifications so you never miss another explosive story. This story proves one eternal truth in modern public life. In the age of social media, a single moment of courage, executed with preparation, can redefine everything. It can change careers, shift narratives, and inspire millions who are tired of watching arrogance go unchecked. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand, speak with truth, and refuse to be silenced.